Welcome back, we're here with another deck profile for Buddyfight, and this one is 5th Omni Cavalry Dragons. So the buddy for this one is 5th Omni Cavalry Dragon Sandstaff Arcade. Now this is quite an interesting card. She's got a few skills, the first of which is she cannot be called to the centre, so she can only be played on the left or right. When your opponent deals you damage, if you do not have a monster in the centre, you can move this card to the centre. When this card is destroyed, put the top card of the deck into the gauge and gain a life. So quite a few interesting skills. So let's move on into the deck profile. So first up is 5th Omni Cavalry Dragon Drunk Sword Shell. Now this is a grade 0 that's brilliant for like triggering some of the skills you use in the deck. Now his skill is basically when he's called and he attacks, you either destroy this card or take a damage. Now his stats are 4, 2, 3, but by taking that damage, and because it does say damage rather than pay a life, it means you get to trigger off some of the other cards, getting some other effects off, and then basically controlling either your gauge or trying to basically kill some of your opponent's cards by some of the effects that we'll come on to shortly. So a really handy card for the deck. Run 3 copies. Would kind of maybe go to a 4th, but it's pretty strong at 3. So next up we're going into the grade 1. So the size 1 for this one is 5th Omni Cavalry Dragon Fire Sword Debel. Now this card, when you take damage, you get to put the top card of your deck into the gauge. So this is great at basically charging up your gauge for you to either get ready for an impact or just basically using it as a cost for one of the other skills that some of the other cards have. So very good card, very cool kind of drive engine to your gauge. Really crucial. Run this one at 4. So after Fire Sword, this is the next key grade 1 I'll run. Now this is 5th Cavalry Dragon Windbow Maglix. Now this guy's skill is brilliant. When you take damage, you pay a gauge and destroy a size 1 or less on your opponent's field. So with the size 0 that we've already spoken about, you could trigger this effect. If you take damage from say your size 2 on your opponent's turn, you can kill their size 1 or size 0. It's really good at filling out your opponent's cards. Plus, if you have got Fire Sword out, you're kind of doing it for free because his skill will trigger, basically get a gauge, then use that gauge straight away to kill a monster on your opponent's turn. So really good, handy, strong card. So the next one up is my buddy herself. So we've spoken about this one already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but obviously run this one at 4, mainly because of her skills, getting the gauge, getting a life, moving it into the centre. So basically if you have taken damage once already, it's cutting down on how much damage you're taking and getting a life back as well as gauge. So it's kind of a handy card as well. Now the next one I run is actually a part of the Armoured Dragon section of the 5th Omni. This is, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, Soul Retrunner Sayaki. Now this one's skill is quite interesting. I run this at 3 because basically you pay 1 gauge, he enters the field. You then get to basically call a size 1 or less Omni Lord from the graveyard. So say if your buddy's gone to the graveyard, or the size 0, or even Windblow, this guy allows you to call him back from the graveyard, so it's kind of keeping the size of your hand quite consistent. So it's quite a nice little card, this one. So we run this one at 3. So next up is Magic Blade Mazzari. Now this guy is exceptionally handy. He can't be called to the centre, but to be honest, because of all these skills that the 5th Omni Cavalry Dragons use, that's not that important. So this one basically allows you to draw a card, and the way it works, you pay a gauge, can't not be called to the centre. When you are attacked, you may pay 1 gauge and draw a card. So this is quite good if you've got a low hand, quite a lot of gauge because some of the other skills. Basically pay a gauge, top up your hand, maybe the next time you then pull a shield, which then stops them attacking you, or maybe it's topping up some monsters for your next play, which is quite handy as well. So exceptionally good card. We run this one at 3. So next up is Icelance Marek. Now this guy is quite a good deck control in a way, quite a good damage control, I suppose the right term is. This card cannot be called to the centre again. If you have another monster with 5th Omni Lord in its card name, this card gets Penetrate. But the other skill that is exceptionally handy is basically you may pay a gauge, and If you do, you can reduce the damage by 1. So this is about the control. So we're in a very controlled meta at the moment. A lot of the decks about controlling the amount of damage taken, how the offense as well as defense controls kind of the board itself. And this is quite a clear example of this, because by paying 1 gauge, you're controlling how much damage you're taking. So it might be taking it from 2 to 1, especially if you're Omni, they do require you to take some hits. So we run this guy at 3, great stats, 6k, 2 crit, 3000 defense. With another 5th Omni on the 4, he gets penetrate, so it's an exceptionally handy card. So last of the grade 2s is 5th Omni Dragon Lord Drum himself. Now this is quite a hard card to get hold of in the current meta. It's quite expensive, it's holding its price exceptionally well, there's not many of them around to even buy. Now this card cannot be called to the centre, pay 1 gauge, put the top card into its soul. When you are dealt damage, if your life is 6 or less, destroy a monster on your opponent's field. So it's not governed by basically size, you just destroy a monster on your opponent's field. Exceptionally good card. I am looking for a second one of this, and I'm even toying with the idea of maybe adding a Tembu just to kind of complete the set and get a decent bit of offense and defense, but an exceptionally good card. Runs exceptionally well with another card I'm about to come up, which is this guy. Now this is 5th Armored Dragon Leaping Zerku. Now this guy can only be run if your buddy is a 5th Omni of any description. Basically he's a searcher. So when this guy is called, if you're on 6 life or less, you can basically search your deck for a drum. Now it's a size 1, I've kind of done this out of order because he's very crucial to run with drum. They come in a secret pack together. And they just kind of give you an extra opportunity to find drum to get his skill out. So moving on into this. So the first one we use is 2 copies of Emblem of the Omni Lords. Now this is a dual effect magic card. Basically it's a cost of 2 gauge. Choose one of the following 2 effects. The first effect is you may basically search your deck for an Omni Lord and put it into your hand. The second is you may counter. For that cost of 2, you can tap a size 2 or less monster on your opponent's field. So if you're being attacked with some quite strong aggression, quite a good counter spell, pay 2 gauge, tap it. But more importantly, this gives you another 2 opportunities to find the drum, so you can keep it in your hand to get to the right life to really start board wiping your opponent and really doing some major damage to them on your turn. So next up we're going to go into the shield. So this is Blue Dragon Shield. We run 2 copies of this. For any of you true Buddyfight fans, you do realise how hard this card is to get hold of, especially for the amount of decks I run. So we run 2 in this particular deck. Now the way this works is basically you nullify the attack and gain a gauge. So that tops up your gauge for obviously things like the Omni Lord, impacts, weapons. So quite a handy card to use in any Dragon World deck. Now next up is a Dragon Shield I would honestly thought I wouldn't have used, but getting to know the deck is actually quite crucial. Now this is Dragon Lord Shield. You nullify the attack, you take 1 damage. So basically when your opponent attacks you, if they're doing you 2, 3, 4, whatever crit, this nullifies the attack, but you still take 1 damage. When I first read this, I thought that is absolutely crazy. Why would you nullify something still to take a hit? But as you learn the deck, you do realise that just taking that 1 damage triggers so many different things. You're gaining gauge, you could be gaining cards, you could be destroying monsters on your opponent's turn still. So it's controlling the game even when you're basically to the point you're not even taking that much damage to do so much. So because of that, I've gone up to 4 of this card. And I would really recommend anyone who's toying with it or just kind of overlooked it to really use it, because it balances the deck so well. Next up is 3 copies of Drago Solid. Now same again, this is a counter, can only be used if you have a monster on the left or right. Choose one of those monsters in battle and give it plus 5k attack, plus 5k defense, and then you also get to counter attack, so you also get to smack back at them on their opponent's turn. Now this is quite handy for this deck. We run 3 copies of this. The main reason is you play a lot of cards on your left and right, so because of their skills, some of those cards are going to be heavily targeted. So if they say attack you for 2, realise that that card's doing something, they might use a lesser monster to then attack them. This allows you to clear that out, so that allows you to focus on maybe that 1 card in the centre or an extremely lower support field on your opponent's side, which is a lot better for you. So next up is Drago Charge. Now this is an interesting card. You pay 1 damage, so you take that damage to activate all the effects again. You then basically choose a 5th Omni on the field, and the next time it will be destroyed, it remains on the field. So that basically means they've either got to attack that card twice, or that's setting you up to use some of those skills to maybe either thin down their side of the board, top up your gauge or your hand. So same again, a lot of control, quite a nice card to use. So the last for the spell lineup is 5th Omni Oath Dragon Undertake. Mainly cast this card when you're dealt damage, call a size 2 monster, 5th Omni Lord from the graveyard or drop zone by paying its call cost. Run 3 of these. I do like one in hand, so if for any reason my monsters are thinning out, I can call it from the graveyard, which kind of gives me a little bit more flexibility. Maybe we'll go down to 2 in the future, but mainly run this at 3 just to keep calling certain monsters back that are usually targeted quite heavily. So into the item. So first up, out of the 6 items I run is 4 copies of Dragon Lord's Horde, Drago Emperor. Pay 1 gauge and pay 1 life. Keyword there, pay 1 life, so you're not taking damage, so technically you can't get off any effects, but its skill is so worth using. Basically, every time you're dealt 3 or more damage, you get to reduce it by 1. 6,000 attack, 2 crit. Now that skill is quite handy because you are taking a lot of damage. If you've got something big on the field that you're battling and they're doing 3 crit at you, it's just kind of cutting down on that damage again. Using some of the cards we've already gone through, paying a gauge, reducing the damage. It's all about controlling that situation to the best of your ability with the card you've got on the field, and this really helps you do it. So the last 2 weapons I use is 5th Omni Dragon Fist Ablaze. Now this is pay 1 gauge and take 1 damage. So another take 1 damage, so you get to operate some of those effects that we've already gone through during this profile. Basically, if you have a monster with drum in its card name on the field, this gets additional 3,000 power and penetrate, so it is quite a handy card. Plus, if you take any damage that is dealt to you other than by battle, it's reduced by 1. So key example there, Thundermine basically is reduced by 1. Spectral Strike, anything like that, this is cutting down on the amount of damage you'll take from that. 3,000 to crit. Not the most aggressive of the fists that I've used in other decks, but it is quite handy. One thing I will say, if any of you drum fans out there, so I've got a drum deck myself that I love completely and use quite regularly when I'm playing friendlies. This particular card works exceptionally well if you have a very strong drum build. So for example, there's 3 or 4 different drums in your deck. This is a great card to use in your item zone. So moving on into the impacts. Okay, so next up is the impact. Now I run 2 copies of this. I am timing going to 3 because it's all about trying to get the game won as soon as possible. Now this is quite an interesting card. I will be honest, it's not one of the most interesting of artworks. It's quite noisy, but it is a fun card to use. Basically, it's a cost of 3 gauge. You must have either a buddy monster out or a drum monster, a monster with drum in its name out. You must have an item equipped, so there's kind of a few key areas that you must fulfill before you can play this. You must not have a monster in your centre, neither must your opponent. So once you've met all that criteria, what you get to do is basically choose a monster on the field and choose an item, and then you get to deal the sum of those 2 crits to your opponent. So you basically get to add up the crit. So if you've got a weapon with 3 crit, you might even have a monster with 2 or 3, so you're dealing 6 at your opponent. If you're maybe planning for this, there's a couple of monsters out there with 4 crit, you might have one of them in your hand, play that, play an item, got your buddy out, deal another basically potentially 7 crit to them. So this is a monstrously damaging card. So I run 2 of these. So this has been my deck profile for the 5th Omni Cavalry Dragons. Now I will be honest, this is still in its infancy, as we're about to see the All-Stars come out later this month, so keep watching when they hit. I'll do an updated deck profile of this because there'll be some new size 3s out, some new size 2s and 1s as well. Plus it'll be interesting to see how this progresses or see what happens next. But if you have any requests, please feel free to note them in the options below, and keep watching as we'll see some more meta decks plus some other fun buddy fight decks coming up on the channel shortly. Take care, bye.